6 of the 7 candidates. Sorry, I was interrupted there. Joe Fenrick has prior work-related commitments and is unable to attend this evening. Each guest will get 2 minutes to open and introduce themselves. We will then move to 7 pre-selected questions that the candidates have not yet seen. Each candidate will get 2 minutes to answer, with the exception of a few questions that are strictly yes or no questions. The candidates do, however, know what order they will go in to answer each question. At the end, they will get 1 minute to make a closing statement. Only moderators and candidates will have the opportunity to speak at tonight's forum. Let's get started with the introductions, starting with Dr. Briggs.
Thank you. And thanks so much for hosting this forum. So thrilled to be here. I'm Sheila Briggs, and I began my 30-year career as a kindergarten teacher. I became a principal and then later worked as a central office administrator in Madison, supporting 32 elementary school principals. I couldn't have imagined leaving my district until Tony Evers called me in 2011 and asked me to join him at the Department of Public Instruction as the Assistant State Superintendent. Well, of course, I jumped at the opportunity. At the state, my focus in the agency has been academic excellence. The 5 teams under my direction lead work that includes student standards, career and technical education, academic and career planning, career pathways, bilingual education, teachers of the year, early childhood, teacher preparation, and educator effectiveness for the state of Wisconsin. I'm so excited to be here tonight to tell you about my vision for education in Wisconsin. Because of my experience at the department working with Wisconsin's 422 school districts, I know what is working for our kids and I know what needs to change. I really believe as a state, we have to reduce the use of our high stakes testing. We have to restore respect for our teachers, increase mental health supports for our kids, and most importantly, fully fund our public schools. I have deep relationships across the state. I know how to work with other agencies in state government to help our schools get the resources that they need and to plan for recovery from this crisis. And most importantly, I know about the immense challenges that we have ahead of us, but I will be ready to lead the department on day one. Thanks so much.
Hello, my name is Troy Gunderson. I'm a retired school superintendent from the School District of West Salem, and we're located in La Crosse County. West Salem is sort of a suburb of the city of La Crosse. I grew up in a small town called Colfax, Wisconsin. It's located up near Menominee and Eau Claire, a town of 1,000 people. I went to school there from kindergarten through 12th grade. Mom and dad still live in the same house that I grew up in. I talked to them this afternoon, as a matter of fact. After college, I became a high school math and computer science teacher at a little place called Melrose Mindoro School District, which is about 25 miles north of West Salem. And then I became the principal at the high school in West Salem for 15 years. And then I spent 2 years at Gay Electric Trimble as the superintendent, and then another 10 years as the superintendent here in West Salem. We had an impressive record in the 10 years I was here in West Salem. Our elementary school is a National Blue Ribbon School of Excellence. Our capstone projects for kids are nationally recognized. Our campus has been renovated and updated. And so I'm proud of what we've accomplished in service to our community and kids. And I think it's time for me to give that back to the state of Wisconsin. I put together a plan called Ready to Lead, Ready to Learn, Ready to Teach, in hopes of producing future-ready graduates. I think it's time for leadership in Madison that is able to unify the entire state. I'm the only candidate on this list that you're going to see tonight who lives north of Madison. And I think as we look at the size of our state and the corners of our state, it's time for someone who can bring us all together, because what happens in Milwaukee has to matter to the folks in Colfax, where I grew up, and what happens in Colfax has to matter to the folks in Milwaukee. I'm really excited about the opportunity to be part of this group. The other candidates are fantastic people, and we've enjoyed a tour of the state of Wisconsin. I'm looking forward to the questions tonight. And once again, Troy Gunderson, candidate for state superintendent. Thank you.
Inasmuch as I have a common educational experience with similar degrees and DPI licenses with my fellow candidates, I have a not so common career trajectory in that I entered the field of education as a parent of a child with a disability. The unfortunate experience during my son's first IEP meeting propelled me into the field of education. I have served at every grade level from K-3 through 12, starting humbly as a handicapped child assistant to a para, and finally as a district administrator. I have served in public, private, charter, and choice, seeing the good, the bad, and the ugly. I am the only candidate that went from depending on the state to care for my children to serving at the highest level of the state, the governor's office. I have an uncommon disposition as a person of color who has had to navigate systems that were not and still are not set up for people of color and those living in poverty, and managed to still experience high outcomes. Thus, I know firsthand what it takes and what is needed to address inequity, not from a theoretical perspective of what someone has told me, but as someone who has lived in equity and knows what equity not only looks like, but feels like. I possess the knowledge, skills, and disposition to close the persistent achievement gaps.
Good evening. I'm Deborah Kerr, and I'm so excited to be here tonight. And thank you to the Wisconsin PTA for your service. And thank you to all the parents out there who have been just so heroic during this virtual learning and this pandemic as you became your children's teachers. So thank you for having us all tonight. Well, I'm a small town girl from Western Chicago suburb, Melrose Park, Illinois, with big world dreams. And my vision is to create a world-class education system for all kids in Wisconsin that becomes a model for other states across our country. I've been dedicated to education for the last 40 years of my life. I've worked in all sectors of education. I'm parochial educated, taught in a private school, created a 4K charter school, and I've been public school dedicated for the last 34 years. I'm an award-winning teacher and principal, high school athletic director, a back-to-back state girls basketball championship coach, and also a proud Wisconsin superintendent for the last 20 years. I started out my experience in a small rural school district in Wilmot Grade School, a 4K through 8th grade school. And then I transitioned to Brown Deer School District, a first tier suburb of Milwaukee. And I'm hoping that we can come together as thought partners and leaders to learn what's best for all kids and lead together to close achievement gaps and eliminate all the disparities that are occurring within our kids. I also believe I want to create strength-based pathways for all of our students starting in elementary school that promotes workforce development based upon the needs of our state. Students need to be exposed early on to what opportunities exist in our own communities and all across the state. We have talented students in all of our high schools. We can do this by partnerships and coming all together, stronger together, our Wisconsin promise. Thank you.
Well, hello, Heidi, Jill, and Heather, and all the PTA members, the other candidates. I'm Steve Krull, running for State Superintendent of Schools, and really appreciate you guys having us here today. And, you know, I kind of have a little bit different of a story. So when I finished high school, I went to the military. I was in the Air Force for 6 years as an instructor and a training manager. I found that I really like to teach there. I also found that I'm pretty good at systemic change. And it's actually been kind of weird, you know, moving into this type of position because normally I'm a pretty humble person. So I've had to force myself to talk about myself. But while when I left, I went to college for teaching. And actually I had a daughter. I do have a daughter who's in college right now, coincidentally. But I was her president of the PTA actually at her school for 2 years. So I know what you guys are going through, and I know what it's like to be doing the work that you're doing. After that, I became a teacher, an academic coach, an assistant principal. Now I'm a principal at Garland School in Milwaukee. We have about 600 kids, and we're doing great stuff there. I'm very proud of the staff, the students, the parents, the PTA. I mean, it's really awesome, the things that we're doing as a collaborative team. Now, I'm running because I just can't take the system anymore. You know, in being in it for as long as I have, I got my dissertation, did some research on education policy and such, and I'm just seeing that our system is falling apart. You know, kids are getting left behind. We can see it as far as like, look at millennials. They're making less money than the baby boomers did, like 20% less, right? We have a system that's falling apart. And I believe that education is the foundation for that system. And so I want to make sure that we can build something that's going to be sustainable and long lasting and that we can be proud of. So then every child can succeed. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jill Underly, and I'm currently the superintendent of the Pecatonica Area School District in Southwest Wisconsin. I'm married, I have 2 kids in middle school, and we live on a small farm with a bunch of chickens, cats, and a aging Labrador Retriever named Moose. I have my experiences in public education all the way from early childhood, elementary principal of a public school as a middle school and high school teacher. I was a middle school and high school principal, director of instruction. I've also worked at the DPI for 5 years under Governor Tony Evers' first term. And then I also worked at UW-Madison in student affairs, where I worked with primarily first generation college students from rural and urban Wisconsin school districts. And as I said, I'm the superintendent of the Pecatonica Area School District, and the only candidate who's currently leading a school district right now during the pandemic. So I have experience in rural schooling, suburban and urban education. I'm currently a public school parent. As I shared, I've worked in lots of areas of K through 16. I have experience working with the legislature and with my professional organizations on the legislative committees. I have a reputation of working with legislators as well as parents and school board members. And it's one of the best parts of the job is working with parents. I believe that we need to serve all kids every day. My platform is rooted in equity. I'm looking forward to initiating programs throughout the state that serve kids, especially elementary childhood, early childhood, birth to 3, 3K and 4K. So thank you so much.
All right, our first question. The pandemic is impacting every student and family in the state to some degree. Where do you propose schools begin to pick up the pieces? How do we figure out how far behind grade level each student is? How can educators meet students where they are academically? And how do we address parents' concerns about learning loss during COVID?
Okay, all right. I think the COVID impact on schools has, of course, just been dramatic. And I think the role of the Department of Public Instruction and something like that is to gather as much information as we can so that you can lead. We've had a real dearth of leadership in Madison for our school districts, quite frankly, for our state. And I think what the DPI needs to do is collect the data. And I know they're doing some of that, but nationally and statewide. And then use our entire network around the state to create pathways for returning to school in the fall and addressing the issues. What are the social emotional issues of students? What are the social emotional issues and impact on our employees? And how have we disconnected with families? I think one of the most important things we do is reach out and connect to families. You'll hear across the state people losing connection with families and students. And I think the DPI's role in that is to help facilitate. I think we can use our CSAs because the issues are different in different parts of our state. If you think in a densely populated areas in Southeast Wisconsin where they haven't went to school, you know, they're going to need more resources. My hometown in Colfax, they've been in school every single day. When we stop and think about that, the differences in our state, depending upon where you live, the quality of the facility, the size of the town, all of those kinds of things. So we can use our CSAs to line that up. And I guess we're going to have to assess children when we get back to figure out, you know, how much learning loss has taken place and being able to figure out then how to address that, how to close that gap, make a long-term plan. This isn't going to be fixed by Halloween or the next year, something like that. We have to put together a 10-year strategy for adjusting the way in which we react to what's happened to our children, our families. And under the plan that I put together, Students Ready to Learn, this is about connecting families to the school, about serving our youngest children with the resources that we have, and also allowing the schools to play an important part in communities with community service. So I think the DPI simply needs to lead the discussion and help people develop a plan of attack.
Thank you so much for that question. So obviously, we know that the pandemic only exacerbated the fact that we have inequities in our state that result in a large achievement gap. And of course, our children need to go back to school. But when I think about this question, I think about the telephone call that I received from a Wisconsinite who is down in Florida helping her sister take care of her 2 autistic children who are not in school right now. And she said to me, for my own child, it is time for my child to go to school. But for my autistic nieces, it's not a good idea because they have pre-existing health conditions. Further, I'm thinking about children who may have had a kidney transplant, who are taking immune suppressant medications, and the parent just may not be comfortable with their child going back to school. If you take a look at my Bill of Rights for Wisconsin students, one of the rights includes that parents and students should have the right to determine and choose the modality of instruction, whether that's face-to-face, blended, or virtual. There's been a lot of conversation about what can happen, and there's even been some conversation at our legislative level saying that school boards should make a decision by a 2/3 vote. I am opposed to that. I think that parents need to be the ultimate ones who work with teachers to decide what's in the best interest of students. After all, parents and teachers are the ones who have daily interaction with our students. And when we make those decisions, we have to make sure that we work with DHS, the Department of Health Services, and the Department of Children and Families to develop a COVID checklist and ensure that PPPs are equitably distributed to all of our schools, unlike the way our funding is not right now inequitably distributed, to make sure that we have everything that we need, whether it's a mask, whether it's barriers, whether it's ventilation systems, so that our students and our teachers are safe when they go back and we don't have an uptick again and have people coming back and forth.
Who could have imagined a year ago that a pandemic would force all of our schools to close across the country? Last March was a very stressful time for all of us. You know, our parents became teachers, our teachers became students learning technology as quickly as they can, and our community leaders became social workers trying to feed all of our children, make sure they had all the tech devices that they needed and all the resources just for basic life necessities. I hope we look back on this pandemic and realize there are many silver linings that we can incorporate moving forward. Education has to transform and do things differently. We can't go back to the old traditional way of doing things. We are really at a crisis point right now in our public schools. Statewide, our data reveals that there's declining enrollment all across Wisconsin. 4 and 5K students are not showing up in these virtual school programs. Teachers are burning out. Parents are fatigued. They desperately want their students back in school. There's a teacher shortage, and we just have a stressed workforce in general and a stressed economy. So it's time to have our kids go back into school safely and sensibly. I'm the only candidate who has proposed a statewide reentry plan to put our kids back to school safely. Looking at what the teachers need, but also looking at all the mental health, social, emotional learning, and trauma that needs to be dealt with. Many of our students never had closure from last year. In this pandemic. So we need to make sure that we're addressing those needs first so we can best teach them. I think our teachers know best what kind of assessments they need to give their kids to figure out what's their current level of proficiency and what is needed right now to help ensure growth and proficiency by the end of the school year or whatever school year that is at this point. So let's work together. That means wearing masks, socially distanced, washing our hands, and doing everything that the CDC says to get us all back to school safely. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Heather, for the question. You know, I think that one thing that this pandemic has shown us, it spotlighted the vast inequities between districts and schools across the state. I mean, the fact that we have some districts that have 15 kids in a classroom, others that have 45. We've got some schools that have brand new HVAC systems that can suck out all the viruses in the airborne virus and have all the PPE equipment that they need to be safe, right? And I think that this was highlighted by this pandemic. So I think this is an opportunity for us. This is an opportunity for us not only to prepare ourselves for the next pandemic, which we know is going to come probably within the next 100 years, if we look at history on this, but also to prepare our kids for success and get rid of the inequities within our schools. The school that I work at right now, we have 30 kids roughly per classroom. Imagine if we were at 15, what we could do, because we're already pretty successful. We have great teachers doing great stuff, parents involved. Imagine what we could do if we had reasonable class sizes. Like, this is an opportunity that we need to take to move Wisconsin forward. And that's why I'm proposing that we look at our financial system. And that's the problem right now, is some districts get roughly twice as much money than others per child for their base funding. That's the main issue. So when you have that much inequity, of course, in Colfax, they're down at 15 per class and they're in person. But in Milwaukee, we can't do the same thing, right? Or in other parts of the state. So we really need to produce an equal system and then an equitable system to ensure that really every child has the opportunity they deserve and that we're prepared for another pandemic. Hey, thank you very much.
I too want to thank you for this question. It's certainly the question that's on everybody's mind. And I think these concerns are real. And I want to acknowledge them, that everybody is worried about our kids and their learning. The COVID pandemic, as the other candidates have already indicated, has laid bare the inequities that are in our public school system and in our society, and they've existed long before COVID. For example, the lack of rural internet or high-speed wireless access and affordability, food insecurity, the fact that many Americans don't have savings accounts because of suppressed wages that have made it more and more difficult to afford basic necessities. The cost of living has increased dramatically compared to our wages, but we also lack access to mental health. There are shortages of mental health professionals, not just in our urban, but in our rural communities too. And I have to add that I personally don't feel that we should be pushing our kids any harder. Everybody is worried about the learning, but I do feel that the kids are going to be okay. And we're doing what we need to do to stay on course, giving them access to curriculum, giving them access to the technology, and we'll pick up where the kids are when they meet up with us. We also have to remember that they are also surviving a pandemic, and they may have lost family members, loved ones, perhaps a teacher, or even a home or a job, and they have anxiety and fear, and we need to be aware of that as well. What I would do was I would advocate for more mental health in our schools, advocate for more broadband and high-speed wireless access, advocate for more after-school opportunities for our elementary and K-8 students, as well as more summer programming too. But most of all, I think we need to provide some grace to our public schools, to our teachers and our parents.
So I also agree that this is something that we have to really look at, the trauma that we have collectively gone through. We know that everyone has not experienced this pandemic in the same way, but we know that there has been fear, anxiety, there has been, very real loss of life or serious illness in our children's lives and in the adults in our schools and our families' lives. And so when we talk about picking up the pieces, we have to lead with making sure that we have empathy and care for all of the students and the adults and the families that have gone through this together. But I believe that we can do that while at the same time we are addressing the learning needs of our students. And in fact, students thrive when we do this well. So I agree that our kids are going to be okay, but only if we know how to do this properly. So I believe deeply that the most important thing that we do is not fall into the trap of remediation. We know, and we have years of research that says that when we put students that are behind into remediation programs and courses, they end up just falling farther and farther behind. So what we actually need to make sure that we are doing is that our teachers, who are very good at this and very smart at this, need to look at where kids are. They need to be teaching grade level instruction that is rich and complex and interesting and engaging, and they need to be providing supports for students that are behind to be able to access that instruction. That is how we are going to keep everyone moving forward while at the same time catching them up. And if we do that, our kids are going to be okay.
Currently, elementary school curriculum tends to focus on math and reading, largely due to standardized testing. Do you believe it is possible to move away from standardized testing even after the pandemic ends, so that younger students can receive a more well-rounded education?
Thank you so much for that question. Quite honestly, the Wisconsin Constitution says that all students in Wisconsin are entitled to a well-rounded education. Our legislatures have defined a well-rounded education as not only reading, writing, math, science, and social studies, but also art, music, gym, Phi-Ed, library, media, and computer science. So first of all, we need to make right and we need to fulfill our promise according to the Wisconsin Constitution. Second of all, the purpose of assessments is supposed to be to drive decision-making. Our summative assessments that the state gives around grade 3, 8, and 10 would be a very good indicator of how well we're performing as an entire state around our students' performance. However, what's most important are formative assessments. Those are quarterly interim assessments that are given during the school year by teachers, oftentimes made by the teachers, aligned to the Wisconsin state standards, so that they can use that information to drive decision-making, which is exactly what we did at Urban Day School, where 99% of our students qualified for free and reduced lunch, and 100% of our students were students of color. And we were able to increase student achievement, reading proficiency from 30% to 70% in 3 years using formative assessment and not summative assessments. So what I say is that we need to provide a well-rounded education to our students, and we need to use assessments only for driving decision-making and determining what it is that our students need, what do we need to reteach, and what additional supports they need.
I think the idea here is, what is the best comprehensive program for all of our kids? And research shows that there's a certain amount of minutes that are needed to help all kids learn and grow and develop grade level proficiencies in all subjects. And even during all the cuts in budgets over the last couple of years, Brown Deer School District never cut any of their programs. They maintained the fine arts, the physical education, music, and art, because we valued that. So we value all of those special types of activities and programs, just like we do reading, math, writing, and arithmetic, social studies, and science. So I think it's important to have a great balance. I do think it's important for our elementary school students to be exposed to many different types of programs and have a variety of different instructional approaches. So we also added the makerspace idea for, instead of teaching keyboarding to kids, we allowed our kids to incorporate design thinking and think about project-based learning and learning by doing, because these are what the type of activities that kids love to engage in. They love to think out loud and work with their peers and work with their partners. A standardized test is a federal mandate, and I do not agree with all the time that we've been spending devoted to standardized testing, because we never get the results back in time to make any educational decisions. I agree with the other candidates in that We need more formative assessments that are ongoing where you get feedback and can measure growth and proficiency and better track milestones that children are achieving. And so that's what a well-rounded education will look like, making sure kids have daily physical education, they have brain breaks, they have an opportunity to work with their peers in addition to the content areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill, for the question. You know, as a building principal, we really do see the impact of standardized testing on our kiddos. You know, one test alone for an 8-year-old is 7 hours long. That's longer than the college ACT entrance exam. I mean, just thinking about that, like a 16-year-old, someone half their age is doing a test that's longer than what you need to get into college. Now, that's just one test. There's a plethora of other tests. It's ridiculous. And we spend so much instructional time that I really don't know how we can achieve better on a test because we don't have time to teach anything. So what gets cut, right? No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top, Every Student Succeeds Act. These top-down approaches are garbage and they haven't worked. They've essentially taken away what kids need in order to be engaged in school. Art, music, gym, physical education, that's the same, physical education, library, you know, STEM, you know, the extra types of courses. I know that the thing that kept me in school was social studies. I liked that in high school. It's the only thing that kept me in there. And so I believe that we need to go back to a system that's a well-rounded education, because gifted and talented for kids doesn't just mean math and reading. You can be gifted and talented at any type of skill that we have in school, and we need to draw that from each one of our kids, really draw that from them so that we can ensure that they are engaged, they're ready to learn, and then we can cook them so then we can get them to learn the other subjects. But that's going to take a revamping of our testing system because it's just not working. We've been doing it for too long, and what are we getting? The same results over and over. Thank you.
All right, our next question. The current recommendation.
Wait, I didn't answer the
Oh,
question
I'm
yet.
so sorry.
That's okay. So I would love to explore moving away from assessments, at least the most high stake ones, for example, so that students had more time to receive a well-rounded education, including creative endeavors, but also science and social studies, civics, and more recess time, for example, or a longer lunchtime for older kids, because we do spend a lot of time teaching to the tests. I think it is possible to move away from the high stakes testing or perhaps the amount of time we spend on assessments, but it would take an act of Congress because of the federal laws. But I would advocate for it. And I know so many kids who have test anxiety, and it would be great if we could reduce this pressure on them. Ultimately, I trust our teachers. They are the professionals. Formative assessments, as well as summative assessments in our schools, are important to ensure that we're meeting our essential learning outcomes and our standards. And that also helps identify kids who need interventions when needed. And if we didn't spend so much time on assessments, we could spend that time on other things for sure. Assessments also cost a lot of money. And when you think about the amount of money we spend on assessments, that money could be used elsewhere as well. Ultimately, though, what testing tells us is stuff we already know. The kids with the most resources in schools, they will and usually do great. And then those schools that are under-resourced don't do as well. And what happens is what we do in human nature, we compare and we contrast, and we report those gaps in the newspaper or on television. But really, it's about opportunity gaps. The schools that have the most resources and the kids that have the most opportunities, they're going to do fine on these standardized assessments. It's the kids in poverty, the students with disabilities, the EL learners. Those are the kids that we really need to put our resources towards.
So we have been chasing test scores for decades, and it's not working. It is important for us to have a well-rounded education for our kids, not only because these other subject areas are valuable in and of themselves. Music and art and world languages are all critically important in the development of our children. But you know what else? Having that kind of well-rounded education actually helps our test scores go up. So we really need to stop chasing test scores. And we really, this is a central tenet of my priorities in moving forward. The other thing I'll say about testing is I actually believe in summative assessment, standardized testing, but where the problem lies is that we have been on this quest where we have started making things like standardized testing high stakes that are then tied to our accountability system. And we have some changes that we could make immediately in our testing system that would actually make it do a better job of actually measuring the things we think it's measuring and not just ending up with results that are correlated with poverty, because our comprehension test measures background and experience of our children. And so we need to move away from that for a reason. But I would also say that while we do have in federal law and in state law our assessment requirements, there are some flexibility opportunities in federal law that Wisconsin hasn't taken advantage of. And I think that's something we need to explore and look at. We also need to be looking at things like statistical sampling. So every single kid doesn't have to be tested every single year in order for us to gather that critical information that we need to be able to measure the health of the system so that we can better serve our students. So there are things that we can do to make this better in our system for our kids.
I'm muted. I'd like to thank you for this question because it sort of hits home with me. We all need to realize that when you rely on standardized in assessments, it forces you to standardize your instruction. You narrow down the instruction to focus on the exam. We all heard what happens to that in terms of the programming that kids received as we chase test scores, as Sheila indicated. When I was a high school principal, I was so frustrated with the reliance on the ACT. We looked into creating a capstone authentic project, and we created what's called a senior exit project at West Salem High School. And I'm a firm believer that the accountability in our state should be around what a 12th grader looks like when they leave. And we should be using formative assessments along the way, as Shondalyn pointed out, to be able to measure and adapt our instruction to each kid so they get there. Well, without a well-rounded curriculum, students can't produce an authentic assessment at the end. Our seniors, they select an off-campus project. We send them out in the community. They do a project, they complete a research, and then we bring people in from the community to assess an oral presentation on defending what they found out and sharing what they've learned. It's a remarkable thing. Kids will remodel trucks, remodel houses. They'll investigate genes. They'll work in science labs. They'll do all kinds of things that they do. But without a well-rounded curriculum, we can't prepare them for that. And so once we set that capstone project up at the end, it cascaded all the way down. And if you don't have a well-rounded curriculum K through 12, the kids won't be able to do that. We've been doing it for 20 years in West Salem. It's a remarkable experience for these 12th graders. And I wish that I could have more time back from less standardized testing along the way so that we could use formative assessments to move each child along and free us up for more authentic things that kids could do. So when they're 18 years old, they can drive their own instructions and they can show the community what wonderful young adults they are as they are ready to be Wisconsin citizens.
The current recommendation of student to school counselor ratio is 250 to 1, yet most schools fail to meet that recommendation. Do you feel that Wisconsin schools should work to reach the recommended ratio? And if so, how do you plan to help our schools reach that goal?
Great question. This is probably one of the first times this question's been asked, so very good. School counselors play a very essential role to meeting the needs of all of our students. Their roles have also changed dramatically also over the last years. And not all elementary schools or schools across Wisconsin have school counselors with this type of ratio. And so the whole idea of social, emotional, and mental health and dealing with trauma is going to require us to have an all hands on deck approach, utilizing not only school counselors, but social workers, partnerships from our local businesses and communities, other clinicians, our hospitals, to help us deal with the social emotional needs and the reentry into school. I would love to see more counselors available in our schools, but especially at the high school, their role has dramatically changed because it's not just about what they want to do after high school, it's what they want to do for their entire future. And right now, our students have so many choices, and I think it's important that we implement fully the new counseling standards that are not really being implemented in all schools across the state to help us better meet the goals of meeting the needs of all kids. Counselors play a mentor role, a coaching role, connecting kids to college, careers, local businesses. They also take care of kids by making sure they have food and coats and other types of basic life necessities. So yes, I would like to see Wisconsin schools work towards this goal, but it's going to take some time because there's a lot of other needs as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. 250 to 1. Wow. The school that I run, we have almost 600 kids, and we have a counselor for 4 days a week. So we are not even close to that recommendation. You know, I do believe that counselors need to be in every single school, in the elementary, in the middle school, and the high school. And they all have different roles depending on what they're doing in each one. You know, in the elementary and the middle school, you're kind of just preparing kids for ideas about different careers or different paths, and you are supporting them in some way, right? For some of the social, emotional, and a type of skills that they need to be successful, or to support them if they're having some type of trauma issue or something that's going on at home. You know, I think though that when we think about counselors mostly though, that's at the high school level. And really, a counselor can make or break a kid, right? I mean, if you've got a counselor who has, you know, really good connections with certain universities or certain organizations, they're going to be in a better spot to prepare kiddos to get to that particular institution. You know, if you've got counselors who know how to, and if we have this ratio, which actually I think that's a little high, I think it should be a little bit lower. But if we have, you know, counselors who are able to sit down with kids and set a trajectory, a plan for what we need for them to do when they get to, you know, their career or a tech school or training or college, you know, those types of systems have to be put in place. And that's only going to take counselors who are well trained and ready to go. And right now, we just don't have enough, and we don't have the funding. So I do believe that this is an important thing that we need to address. We need to properly train and bring counselors into our buildings, and that way we can ensure our kids are successful. Thank you.
Right, so counselors, as aforementioned, they play an important role in our schools. They're the utility fielders, often in our buildings. They do a myriad of things. They teach protective behaviors, for example, to elementary kids, work through social skills. They coordinate community resources. They work with students who are homeless. They sometimes are the ones operating food banks out of our schools, as well as working through social skills, friendships, family problems, grades, scholarships, college applications, apprenticeships. I work in a small school and I see what our counselors do every day. And the ratio of 1 to 250 students is very important because our counselors are stretched so thin. Just an aside, there is a shortage, as we all know, of mental health professionals, particularly in rural areas. But Steve also indicated that school counselors are in high demand, even in urban areas too. We need to recruit these individuals to live and work in rural areas as well as urban areas. As well as other professionals. I think of things, or other professions such as public defenders, for example. Our areas of expertise, are people, I don't know if they want to live in rural areas if they're going to have low pay and, no internet, for example. And so we need to work at ways to get people to live and work in our communities and perhaps pay them more to do so. I'm in favor of services such as like telemedicine, just to step in until we can get individuals and residents in our buildings. I'm in favor of practices and policies that will attract more professionals to live and work in our rural areas, as well as those who can then work in our schools. But we need more mental health and counseling professionals in our school, and a way to get, in our schools, to increase the number of social workers, for example. That would help also reduce some of the burden on our school counselors.
So we all know that kids need access to comprehensive mental health support and to ensure they're healthy and ready to learn. And certainly our school counselors play a really important role in this work. And if we want them to be supporting our students, we have to make sure that they're not only operating crisis mode. If we have ratios higher than 250, it's all they can do to respond to crises with our students. We know that the number of students dealing with anxiety, depression, and other mental health issues has skyrocketed in recent years. Nearly 60% of our high school students reported a significant mental health need in 2019. So that was pre-pandemic. The long-term trends of suicidal thoughts have been heading in the wrong direction for the last few years. And we know that the pandemic has not only exacerbated the mental health issues that are facing our kids, but teachers and staff as well. We're going to need additional resources and support to make sure that everyone can be supported as we're recovering from this pandemic. So we have taken action at the department to make sure that our schools have a more stable funding source for reimbursement for our mental health professionals. There's $6 million in the previous budget for reimbursement of social workers. Now, attempts to have that brought in so that we could reimburse for counselors, school nurses as well, has not been successful. That this is something that needs to continue to be moved forward. Schools have to have a stable funding source. It can't just be grant programs. It has to be something they can rely on to support our mental health professionals, and our counselors are high on that list. They serve an incredibly important role in supporting our kids and families, and we have to make sure that our schools and districts who very much want to be able to meet this ratio can do so.
I thank you for this question again, and it fits into my platform of students ready to learn and producing future ready graduates. I think when we think about counselors, and we talked a lot about that here when I was superintendent, we need to think about reimagining the whole role that they play for all the reasons the other candidates talked about in terms of mental health issues. I mean, my platform talks about connecting schools to the social services that the counties have and the city municipalities have so that we're serving our families. So we're expanding the roles of these folks, especially at the elementary level, because I believe that students ready to learn means their families need support. At the secondary level, where I spent, the majority of my career, I believe that counselors are going to continue to play an expanding role as children have more flexible choices. So in other words, school districts might be a day where there's fewer teachers in a high school because the kids are connected to universities, other programs, other school districts with a myriad of options that they have. That counselors are going to be the person helping them keep it all together and facilitating their learning and their connections to other people, along with all the mental health issues that all of these folks have talked about. So I think when we think about counselors moving forward, we need to sort of erase the slate, start over and think about what do they do in our school districts? How do they connect? How do they work like social workers? How do they work like mental health professionals? How do they serve children every day? How do they connect our secondary kids to the life that's beyond high school and facilitate that transition to technical school, work, university at the other end? We're going to need more of these folks, but I think in order to get more of them, we need to reimagine what it is we're asking them to do. because I think of all of our school personnel, this is an area that's going to expand due to family issues at the front end and a myriad of choices at the end with high school students. And so I support more of them because they're going to have an expanded role.
I thank you so much for this question. My Bill of Rights calls for ensuring that every student has access to a social worker, a psychologist, and a school counselor. The DPI issues licenses that are different, and the training is different from a social worker to that as a school counselor. I am going to speak as relates to the need for school counselors. In my Bill of Rights, I talk about the need for a school counselor so that we can prepare our students for post-secondary outcomes. In the past, the rhetoric has been to make sure that all of our students are college and career ready. Well, when we say that, we leave out a large segment of our students. We leave out students like my son, Brandon. So the school counselor is very important to make sure that we set our students on a trajectory to post-secondary outcomes, whether that's a day program, sheltered workshop, or employment at the Goodwill for students with disabilities, or if it's trades, an internship, 2 semesters of an internship, as I call for in my Bill of Rights, dual credit courses, a minimum of 6 for every Wisconsin student, as I call for in my Bill of Rights, making sure that we have options for students to look at the military, Peace Corps, college, and or careers. In Wisconsin, I have to tell you, I am extremely frustrated with us talking about what we cannot do and what we cannot offer our students because of funding. We pay $30,000 a year per prison inmate, and we pay less than half of that per student. We have a school to prison pipeline that we need to interrupt and take some of that money away from prisons so that we can give our students all of the supportive services they need, whether it's a social worker to help us come out of this pandemic, or if it's a school counselor to set our students on the trajectory towards continuous improvement.
Students of color are suspended at a rate of over 7 times that of non-students of color. Yet studies show that suspensions don't improve behavior or academic outcomes. If elected, how do you plan to lead districts in efforts to reduce suspension rates in students of color and across the board?
Thank you. Yeah, there really is a type of difference in the percent of students who are suspended based off of race. And, you know, the issue isn't necessarily behavior. It has to do with a white student, for example, shoves a desk, a black student shoves a desk, the white student gets counseled, the black student gets suspended. I mean, that's really the inequity within the system. And that's what we really need to break. And I believe truly in a progressive discipline model, one in which it's well laid out, where we have particular types of consequences for, you know, a first time or a second time or a third time within the classroom. And then we move to administration taking on, when there's documented all the way up to that point, what the next steps are. Now, obviously, I'm not including things that you know are bodily harm. That's something different. But when we look at, you know, this disproportionality, it more has to do with the same behavior that I was talking about. And if we can lay out guidelines for districts so they can say, hey, you know, the administrators sitting down with teachers, what did you do with this student the first time that they caused a disruption in your class? Okay, you did this, it's documented. Okay, they did it again. What did you do? Well, I contacted the parent. Okay, what did you do next? I took away a privilege. You know, and then you continue up that progressive disciplinary scale And I think if you put that standardization across the state, or at least those guidelines, you're going to get rid of some of that disproportionality. Thank you.
So this is what my platform is all about. So my platform is rooted in equity. And when I read this question, I think about all the things that I stand for. I stand for early childhood education, mental health access, more teachers of color through teacher recruitment and retention, and better funding in our schools. And one of the things I would do specifically to address this issue of suspensions is have equity audits conducted through our school districts. One of the ways you could do this is by having an equity officer as a cabinet level position at the Department of Public Instruction, and they could lead this work. And what equity audits do is that they make us look at our practices, our internal practices in our schools and our school districts. So we look at school board policies, we look at student handbooks, we look at participation rates in activities or in AP classes. We look at our discipline procedures, we look at our curriculum, we look at the things we offer in our curriculum and our kids represented in our curriculum, kids of color, students with disabilities, students who are LGBTQ+. I mean, we have to look to see that kids are represented, they feel safe, and they also have people who work in the buildings who look like them too. And so what my entire platform does is it addresses this question. If we had better early childhood education, kids could get interventions, for ADHD and speech and language, and that would lift them up, and make them successful all throughout elementary school, make them feel like they belong, provide better access to mental health. There's a lot of trauma, and that leads to discipline issues as well. Kids act out because something's wrong. And baseline of all this is funding. We need to put more funding in our schools so that we can help kids and help this work along.
So I agree that having an equity officer at the cabinet level at DPI is important. I work with her every day. Her name is Latoya Holiday, working on these kinds of issues across our state to make sure everything we're doing at the department is rooted in equity and meeting the needs of our kids. The bottom line is this data is horrible. We suspend and expel more Black kids than white kids, and the disproportionality of that is absolutely shameful. We absolutely have to make a difference here, and part of that is eliminating the bias, or at least beginning by recognizing it, across our system. We have to build anti-racist school cultures where students and staff of color feel supported, safe, and empowered. Our students need to feel a sense of belonging, and having their needs met with high expectations in the classroom. And that's going to eliminate a lot of the issues in the classroom, because the bottom line is we have to look at the adult behaviors that are leading to our students feeling like they need to act out when they're not getting their needs met. So when a student misbehaves, we have to look back 3 or 4 steps before. What was causing the student to not get their needs met? What do we need to change about what we're doing as adults to make sure students feel included? And I think that's going to be paramount to making sure that our students feel safe and feel successful in our schools. I do also agree that making sure that we diversify our educator workforce and our leadership workforce is going to be also important to this sense of belonging in our school, as well as supporting and teaching in professional development and learning with all of our teachers to make sure we know how to properly support and include and educate all students in our care.
Having spent 16 years as a high school principal, everyone on this call can imagine, I suspended a number of children over years. And when I did, I always would say, we've reached the point where I need to protect the school and everyone else from you. And we accept that we as adults have failed. Because how could we not have created a school system where children could get their needs met and not act in a way that we viewed as dangerous to the school system and others? And so I always admitted that I felt like I needed to do that, but I felt also that that was a failure. The data around races or different races, quite frankly, the state of Wisconsin, we have a lot of racists. We have racial bias. People are incapable of getting past that. I've said this in a number of these forums. I'm not interested in sorry or apologies anymore. I want right. And I think part of this is about the cultural thing. And I come back to Ready to Lead. And what I want to do is be able to look at what are our goals and expectations across the state. And it's sort of the same answer around the teacher climate. We don't spend enough time talking about the right way to run a school. I think that's part of leadership. That's part of saying, where do we see public education going in the future and how do we run a school? What's the climate look like for the employee? What's the climate look like for the student? And that's the piece where we're going to talk about race and inequity and the opportunities that we give children. But how are our people going to deal with that? What is the right way to interact? How do you prevent these things? I mean, I would always tell teachers the same thing Sheila did. When we lost control, what happened right before that? And then how are you interacting? How are you culturally sensitive? How are you culturally aware? It's time for us to get this right. This is just intolerable to me. I can't understand why we can't move past this. We have to be better at that.
Thank you for that question. I served as a middle school special education teacher with 35 students who had emotional behavioral disabilities in a self-contained classroom. I did not suspend my students. I was trained that when you suspend the student, you are telling the child you can't handle them. We have got to do a better job. And one of the reasons why I have my Bill of Rights that talks about essentials is so that teachers have time where they are released from students to engage in collaboration, to receive mentoring, to receive professional development, so they can talk about the challenges that they're having and come up with other ways to deal with maybe misbehavior, maybe their interpretation of the behavior. Another thing is, prior to Brown versus Board of Education, Black students were educated by Black teachers. My mother tells me about her teacher named Miss Kizzy, who taught a classroom of kindergarten through 12th grade, and she adapted lessons for that. When we had Brown versus Board of Education, the Black teachers were unemployed. There is a correlation between the rate that we had a decrease in the number of teachers of color and an increase in the number of students who experienced their entire education without a teacher of color. In 2018, there was a body of research that was released that said students who experience 1 year with a teacher of color have greater outcomes and are least likely to drop out of high school. I created a plan to diversify the teacher pipeline when I worked at DPI. In my first 100 days, I'm going to find that plan, dust it off, and implement it so that our children benefit from having teachers who reflect their racial and their cultural backgrounds.
This is part of my platform, Our Wisconsin Promise, where every child will be known by name, strength, passion, and need, ready for a future that they choose. You know, it's important that we look through all the things that we're trying to do through the lens of excellence, equity, and character education. Brown Deer was one of the most diverse suburban school districts in the entire state, with over 80% students of color and 50% economically disadvantaged. I'm the only candidate to raise achievement levels, close gaps, and make sure our Black and white students were walking across the stage at close to 100%. And so how we did it, we acknowledged the data. We looked at the risk ratio of suspensions between Black and white kids, and we decided that was unacceptable. And we created this new touchstone called the Brown Deer Way. Our teachers and our students worked together to create the non-negotiables on how we were going to create this new school culture, this new sense of belonging, and a school community that valued inclusiveness and every child that we served. I'm really proud of the team of teachers and the students who weekly taught character ed lessons based upon respect, responsibility, tolerance, acceptance, and making sure that our community understood what we were doing. I also was very intentional about making sure we had a diverse staff. My administrative team was the most diverse administrative team in the area. Also teachers and others, and more than non-traditional roles. I think it's important that we provide places for kids to be. Our kids never wanted to go home. And so we decided we had to do more with after-school programming in our middle and high school. So in-school suspensions do not work. We incorporated more of a restorative justice model where we tried to work with students. We gave them coaches and mentors, and we tried to figure out what was manifesting some of those issues that were arising in our school classrooms. But the most important thing was our teachers loved our students. And so that was the critical piece. They loved and they cared for them as if they were their own. And so the character education piece is critical as we move forward across the state.
Schools and parent groups alike often struggle to get families involved in their child's education. During your time in education, how have you increased family involvement, and what suggestions do you have for schools and parent organizations to increase family engagement?
I was wondering if that was when I was going first on. So, so this is a great question because I am currently leading a school district right now and also during a pandemic. One of the things, honestly, that came out of the pandemic that was really a surprise has been increased family engagement through the virtual learning, for example, and the ability to do Zoom meetings, for example, or Google Meets or whatever platform you use. We have been able to engage with parents better than ever. You think about IEP meetings, we can have those now during the day. Parents don't have to necessarily commute to the school. They can do them from work. We could also have them on a snow day like today, for example, and not have to reschedule. Other ways that we've included parents, we've done parent site councils in the past 3 years at Pecatonica, which is not uncommon. A lot of school districts do them. But what we do is we make sure that we get parents from all walks of life, maybe parents with kids in different grade levels also. And each building has a site council so that we can talk about different issues that are coming up, work on solutions together. Those have been wonderful. We also engage our parents. We had an active PTA and these were really great activities. They were kind of the cheerleaders for our school, but they were also the individuals that we would go to when we needed problems solved. We looked to our PTA for feedback on policies, on handbook changes. We looked to our PTA to help celebrate I Love Public Schools Week, which is coming up the week of February 21st. We looked to our PTA to be the people that helped us pass our referendum. But we also had our PTA host nights, you know, like Wednesday Science Night, or host the carnival or different activities during the different quarters of our school year. So we have a lot of fun with it. We definitely go beyond the bake sale when it comes to parent involvement.
So I think the most important thing that we have to think about is how critically important parent involvement is. Parents are their children's first and most important teachers. But when we ask for parents to be involved, one, we need to make sure that we're doing it in authentic ways, and we need to be prepared to listen and accept the guidance, the advice, the feedback that they give. And so I think one of the places that we often fall down when it comes to parent involvement is we stop at the very surface level kinds of involvement that we like as schools and as districts. And I think it's critically important that we get parents involved in giving feedback and advice and guidance around how to best meet the needs of their children. And I think we have to be really careful to make sure that when we are reaching out and getting families to engage, we have to make sure that we're reaching all families. We need to make sure that we're not just having a small subset of families that are available to come in and help out, that we're listening to. We have to listen to families that are working 2 jobs and don't have time to come to the school. We have to figure out how to listen to them as well, because they have very important critical feedback for us. But again, we can't ask unless we're ready to listen to the feedback and incorporate that into the things that we're doing. I would also say that I had just an incredible phone call with a mom that has a student with a disability, that during this pandemic, the needs of her child are being met better than they ever have been before. Together, the parents and the teacher were able to work in partnership, manage the behavior, and for the first time ever, figure out where the academic progress needed to be for this child. And we've got to figure out how to take these lessons and bring them into the future with us as partners.
Well, I'd like to thank the PTA for this question. In suburban La Crosse County here, where I worked for 25 years, is a super active PTA doing all kinds of activities in our elementary school, raising funds, having PE nights, art nights, speakers, all of those kinds of things. And of course, the issue that we ran into was, how do you reach those who are either unable or because of their job or their career or their finances to be part of all of that? Like, we really have to make an effort as a school district to think about how to serve families. And if you think about the part of my platform that talks about children ready to learn, their children aren't going to be ready to learn if their families are in crisis. And I just really believe this is back to the issue about the discussion with counselors. You have to find ways to meet parents where they are at so that you can help these families find success, what they need. They can be confident and confidential in their communication to the school so that they become involved in their child's education. They feel threatened, they feel talked down to, they feel disengaged. You have to realize that you're reaching out in service to them. They're not doing you a favor by talking to you. And so that we've really struggled with this in West Salem because we had such a super active group. We always wondered about what happens to those who aren't as engaged, and how do we get them engaged with their schooling. At the high school level, of course, as children get older, it gets more difficult. And rightfully so. The children have to become more autonomous. They have to make decisions on their own. But keeping families engaged, I think the one thing somebody told me one time is meet them where they're at. Find out how they best get information. Find out how you can best connect so that they can best serve their children. And we just made lots of changes in terms of our nights, our communications, in order to reach everybody, because you just have to be flexible so that you can meet folks where they are at, not where you're at.
I am so incredibly grateful for this question, because the challenges that I had as a parent really is an underlining and foundation for why I sit here coming to you in your home tonight via Zoom. As an unsatisfied parent, I knew that something differently needed to happen for me, for my son, and for other children. So I have carried that parent lens throughout my career. When I was at Urban Day School, and we were able to increase student achievement from 30% to 70% of all of our students of color, we had a parent coordinator at each one of our campuses, because some of our parents did not have a good experience while they were at school. So we hired an active parent to be in the building every day so that that person would be available to work with our families. The other thing is, we have to understand that parental involvement occurs across a spectrum. We have to validate and uplift home-based parental involvement, which means parents who are making sure children go to bed on time, reading at night, getting up and getting to school on time. That's why, as state superintendent, I am going to fight for each parent to receive a $350 rebate for additional expenses incurred during the pandemic. The other thing is, we have to find meaningful ways for parents to become involved beyond fundraisers, selling pizza and candy to help with budget deficits. Our parents need to be sitting at the table when we're hiring teachers and administrators. They need to be sitting at the table when we're adopting textbooks to make sure that their children are reflected in those books. They need to be sitting at the table when we come up with school-wide discipline plans and decide what really constitutes a reason for suspension. We have Title II federal dollars that are earmarked for parental involvement. We have to do a better job of what we're doing with those Title II dollars to really focus on making our parents true partners in education.
I think it first starts with respect. You know, all of us need to respect all of you parents as partners in education. We are a team. We're stronger together. When I was the principal at Antioch Upper Grade School in Illinois, I created a PTA because I saw a need for parents who wanted to do something, but they wanted to be involved in a variety of ways. And so this group came up with this wonderful idea to host Friday evening, every Friday, by the way, social and recreational activities at the middle school. They called it Teen Canteen. They charged a minimal fee, and then they offered games. They offered the library for reading. They offered games in the gymnasium and other activities sponsored in the school. So this was a parent group that saw this need, and we were able to accommodate them. And again, as Troy said, we want to meet parents where they are. We need to ask them, how would you like to be engaged? And we can't make assumptions that when parents can't attend school meetings that they don't want to be engaged. You know, many of our parents have several jobs. They're juggling a career and family, and so they all care about their kids. So don't make assumptions about them if they don't show up to a school event. I also think it's important to do positive outreach to all of our parents. So in Brown Deer, all of our teachers were required to call all the parents at the beginning of the year and say, welcome, we're so excited to teach your child. I'm looking forward to getting to know them, and not asking them about any problems, but what could they do to become a better teacher for their child. I also think it was important to offer opportunities for parents when they were already at the school, like parent-teacher conferences to give input about future programs, profile of a graduate. And then like groups of like our Education Foundation, offering family events like Family Fun in the Field House or Trunk and Treat, where families can get together and talk and socialize and celebrate the cultural diversity of your school. So thank you.
Yeah, this is probably one of the most challenging questions. And the reason I say that is because the research about parent involvement, we all know that parent involvement is important. The problem is the research doesn't explain what that means. So when we say they struggle to get families involved in their child's education, well, yeah, because there's so many viewpoints on what that looks like. I mean, look at the vast amount of viewpoints we just heard, right? Now, I have a certain interpretation of this. The first thing is I believe that we need to get parents involved in policy. One thing that we do is we've got a school engagement council in which we talk about different ways to do policy within the building. For example, our school in my tenure has roughly doubled in size. Before I started there was about under 300 kids, and now there's roughly 600. And you know, just logistically, there's issues with traffic, right? And so we sat down as a parent group, as community, even students, teachers, and we sat down and hashed out what that would look like to be able to do the buses go over here? Or what can we do to make sure that the flow of traffic? Should we send middle schoolers out first? What is that? Now, we also did the same thing with homework. We do budget input. I'm running out of time here, so I would love to talk about this longer. But we also do have a very active PTA, and oh my gosh, they are so amazing. And if any of you are out there, thank you for showing up. It is so cool. But we do have a parent coordinator as well who's fundamental, honestly. She speaks Arabic. We have a large Arabic speaking population, and she has been key to helping our school move forward. Thank you.
Some of you have expressed intent in adding the birth to 3 age group into the school system. Do you plan to keep DPI rules for those classrooms similar to what has been done with 4K? And if you are not in favor of adding the birth to 3 age group to the school system, please explain your position.
So early childhood has kind of been the center of my entire career. I started out as an early childhood teacher. When I was in Madison, after 2 failed attempts in previous decades, I successfully brought 4K to the district. I am in charge of early childhood for the state, work closely with the Department of Children and Families on all of the childcare work, lead the Governor's Council and Early Child Advisory Council. And so I live this work every day. One of the things that I also know is how critically important it is for us to work together with our childcare system. And so we all want more early childhood, more quality early childhood opportunities for our kids. The thing that we need to make sure that we're careful of is when we make a decision at the state, we have to ensure that we're not putting out of business the childcare system in our state. That's critically important. We need to work with them as partners. And so while I am totally in favor of state funding going towards additional birth to 3 programming, I am very supportive of using the community approach model that we have championed at DPI to make sure that we are partnering with our childcare communities that know how to do birth through 3 programming well, so we can make sure that it's developmentally appropriate and we're meeting the needs of these young learners, because we know they are different and they have very specific needs that we need to make sure that we are fulfilling. And so there are certainly really important things we need to think about as we are funding that, but on the trajectory we're on right now, it's not sustainable. We have childcare deserts across the state, particularly in rural areas. We have spaces where there are not high quality childcare, and it's time for us to step in and mitigate this crisis before it becomes much worse, and the state does have a role.
This is part of Students Ready to Learn piece of my program. I've talked about it in a number of these forums. I believe we could expand 4K to be all day. And I'd like to make 3-year-old services available to children through our schools. But I think that I would agree with Sheila in that the birth to 3-year-old, it should be a community-based thing. I think we have to use our schools as the facilitators. We have to empower our school districts to manage that. I spent some time in the Sheboygan School District with their superintendent talking about how they've used a number of groups to service children in their 10 different elementary schools. You know, some of them are in affluent areas, some of them are in very impoverished areas. They're getting more support. They have developed plans and programs. I think schools are in a unique position to facilitate and lead that. If we look at rural Wisconsin and the northern 2/3 of the state, if they've had some declining enrollment, they may have room. But I think that that room could be used to allow daycare centers to work in those places, because it has to be a community piece. We just don't want to take another business away or compete with that business. But I've witnessed this around the state, the ability of school districts to play a key role. And you don't want to be too definitive in how you identify that, because what might happen in Colfax might be different than what happens in Sheboygan or happens in West Salem. And if I think about West Salem in particular, we're suburban. The folks drive to La Crosse to work. We got $2 million from the Boys and Girls Club to build a club inside of our school. So we're serving children from 6 in the morning till 8 at night. 250 different families are connected to that. We facilitate that. But that might not be the right answer in Gilman, or it might not be the right answer in Whitewater. We have to create a way in which there's community partnerships K-3, and I think the school district could be used to serve all children age 3, 4, and 5 to better facilitate that.
Thank you for this question. So when we think about birth to 3 programs, there are 2 different types. There are the birth to 3 programs that are part of a school, such as with a community school. For example, Harlem Children's Zone. And there's a big platform and following around community schools where there's a daycare there. There may be a Head Start program there. Then there may be a 4-year-old and 5-year-old kindergarten and an elementary school. That's one. I support that, because typically they operate with different staff, because it's different to be certified to be a child care teacher, and that falls under the auspices of the Department of Children and Family, versus to be a kindergarten teacher, and that's DPI. But I want to talk a little bit more about the birth to 3 programs for children with disabilities. I am absolutely opposed to K-12 world interfering or having any sort of oversight over the Birth to 3 program for children with disabilities. And I'm speaking as a parent. When you have a child who is birth to 3 with disabilities, they need to be in a community-based organization where they have a lot of services wrapped around for the families, because some of the billing for occupational and physical therapy comes from your insurance. Some of it's paid from different buckets. Some of the cost for the special education teachers comes from IDEA. It's a big convoluted kind of system that they already know how to work with. There needs to be a better partnership between our birth to 3 programs and our districts, because according to the law, once a child turns 3, in order to receive their special ed services, they have to leave the birth to 3 program and go to the school system. And that's where I had the difficulty as a parent. That's a huge transition for the families of children who have disabilities, because birth to 3 programs are more comfortable. There's a lot of services wrapped around, and we in K-12 still need to figure out our achievement gaps and supportive services. So there's no way that we need to have birth to 3 programs for children with disabilities in K-12 services.
Well, I've had the great experience of starting 2 4-year-old kindergarten programs in Wisconsin. The first program was a charter school called Bright Beginnings at Wilmot Grade School. And the second one was at Wilmot, or at Brown Deer High School, or Brown Deer School District. So with the charter school, we needed to create some opportunities because we didn't have a lot of childcare facilities that were running quality programs in our community. So we were able to offer this program, get funding through the state grant programs to offer this quality program. And I think it's important as we think about 4-year-old kindergarten, I still believe that parents should have a choice of whether they're going to send their child to a full day 4K program or a half day program. Some parents prefer to keep their children at home, and I think we need to honor that. The other part of expanding 4-year-old funding right now is that I don't want to just expand the funding from half day to full day unless we have some quality benchmarks and outcomes that are expected from those full day programs. In Brown Deer, we ran our half day program based upon the national standards of early childhood. That meant we had 1,200 square feet of classroom space. We had 2 adults in the classroom, 1 teacher and 1 teacher assistant. So a ratio of 1 teacher to 10 kids. We made sure that we were following the Wisconsin Early Learning Standards. And then we also incorporated our partners such as Boys and Girls Club and YMCA to offer wraparound services. And so again, I would want to see more quality in our 4K programs, but I also want to acknowledge that we do have needs in birth to 3. As we think about the collective impact of a K-12 system, I do believe we need to work beyond the Child Find programs that we have in place now. Birth to 3 is critical in terms of addressing the needs early on so that parents know what to do and how to be their best child's teacher. Thank you.
So when we look at, birth to 3 versus K-4 or K-5, we at the school I run, Garland, actually have a K-4 program, and they're phenomenal, full day. And, even though we've got class sizes that are very high, kiddos come in with about 30% able to identify all their letters to about 90-some% who can identify all their letters. I mean, we really do a great job. And Miss Widener and Miss Biava, top-notch teachers. When we start looking at younger grades, or, we do have a K-3 program, but it is for special ed. And again, we have a great teacher, Miss Mosley. She's phenomenal. And the program does then move into those spaces. But when we talk about how we look at birth through 3, I think about that there is a lot that we need to consider. The first is, it starts before birth. We need to make sure that all of our mothers have prenatal care. We need to make sure that our houses don't have lead, right? And so that's the setup that we need to ensure is in place before kiddos are even born. Then once they're born, the standards are different than public schools. my son actually, we didn't put him in K4 because the class size in his K4 school was 30 some, where the standard for daycare was much lower. And he's kind of a wild one, or was. And so he needed that kind of more hands-on, smaller experience, where my daughter was fine in that environment. So that I'm running out of time here. Teachers love to talk, right? So I'll just leave it at that. We do need to think about a lot of things before changing our system.
All right, so this is an excellent question. And the question is, do you want to add the birth to 3 age group into the school system? And do you plan to keep DPI rules for those classrooms similar to what has been done for 4K? And my answer is yes, that's what I plan to do. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I don't really share this widely, but my son has autism. He was diagnosed when he was 4 years old. And at that time, he's a December kid. So he, wasn't in, eligible yet for 4-year-old kindergarten. And I was a young mom. I didn't have a lot of knowledge as to what I needed to do. I was just told by his pediatricians, and I was told that he needs interventions. He needs interventions for speech and language. He needs OT, PT. He needs interventions for behavior, because if he doesn't get them starting now, it'll just make it harder, as he grows up. And what the research shows is that kids, students with disabilities are, especially boys, and especially boys on the spectrum, they have a tendency to get in more trouble if they've got ADHD. So there's a lot of things that could compound his path, I suppose, to be a successful adult. So yes, I believe that we need to have these programs in our schools. Primarily, there's a shortage of these programs. They're difficult to find, if not impossible to find, in rural areas. They're coordinated through the counties, but in my part of the state, 3 counties coordinate out of 1 office. And it's not taking away jobs from providers, because again, these centers are in short supply. I agree they should be community-based. I agree we could work with providers that exist to maybe incorporate them into our school system as employees, so that they could help retain already qualified staff. But I do believe that they should be incorporated in the schools.
Our final question for the night is a yes or no question. If elected, will you be willing to communicate and engage with the Wisconsin State PTA?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes, tell me how to get started.
Of course, yeah, it's important.
Yes.
Yes, of course.
All right, at this time, I'd like to invite the candidates to give a 1-minute closing statement.
I wish to thank the PTA for this opportunity to bring us to this forum and really talk about a very critical issue. Parents are our students' first teachers, and it is imperative that we engage in partnerships. I went into the field of education as a parent. I was an MTEA Action Research Fellow, and my first publication was entitled, "Do We Really Want Parents Involved?" And every step that I've had in my career, I have purposely engaged in relationships and partnerships with parents. When I was a principal, I controlled my Title II funds and made sure that we utilized every penny for parents, and parents were sitting at the table deciding what to do with that funding. As you look at me, I am the epitome of parental involvement taking at its highest level. And I should not be just a happenstance. This needs to happen for more of our parents who need opportunities to develop leadership skills, opportunities to go back to school, and opportunities to lead this state. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, PTA. We really appreciate you doing this tonight. I'm also a National Lifetime member of our PTA, a gift given to me by my Antioch upper grade parents. So I believe in you and thank you for being partners with this, with us. At this time in history, I'm uniquely prepared and qualified to lead our Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. My passion for serving all kids for the past 41 years in all sectors, it makes me the best candidate for this job. Also, I have been a president at the State Superintendents Association and National Superintendents Association, which means I have great relationships with people on both sides of the aisle, so I can get to work right away day one. We have a lot of work to do. We have to recover from significant learning loss, and we know we want to get our kids back to school. But we know that schools can't do this alone, but we can unify our efforts and do this together. That will be our Wisconsin promise, and I look forward to working with you. KerForKids.com. Thank you.
Thank you, President Heidi, to our moderators, Jill and Heather. Really appreciate it. This was awesome. To the candidates, to everybody who's out there. You know, this is a very, very interesting time we're in. Never would I have thought that we'd be in a pandemic where, you know, we have such wide inequities with what's going on between schools, where some are virtual, some are halvesies, some are in person. And I just feel as though that, you know, we try to compare ourselves to one another, but really we're all in this together. We're all trying to do what's best for kids. And as long as we ground ourselves in that principle, that we're all on the same team, then I think that we're going to get through this together. And so I again want to thank you all for listening to us. I know that this was 2 hours, and I'm sure that there's other things that you could be doing today. But yeah, have a wonderful evening and thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I want to echo that. This is one of the most important things going on right now, actually. As this seat at the State Superintendent of Public Instruction is extremely important, and it needs to be at the forefront of everybody's conversation for those of us who care about our public schools. I want to solve problems of inequity. I want to, and I have a proven record of advocating for and showing up for our kids and our public schools and promoting the research-backed proposals that will make our system better. I'm also against school privatization, and I think that needs to be said. This job isn't going to be easy, and I know it. I'm a rural resident of outstate Wisconsin. I'm not from Madison or Milwaukee or the Fox Valley, and I have statewide support. I understand how everything must work together. From having worked at all levels of public education, parents, children, teachers, school boards, libraries, administrators, colleges and tech colleges, community support, legislators, state and federal policy. In closing, I want to thank you for hosting this forum tonight, and I'd like to acknowledge that WEAC, the state's largest teachers union, has recommended me as a candidate for the primary they'd like to support. And I also have the support of 13 Wisconsin legislators and former state superintendents, John Benson and Dr. Bert Grover. I'm really honored and humbled by their faith and confidence in me to do this job and do it well.
So I will add my gratitude for the PTA, not just for tonight, but for what you do always to support our schools. So thank you so much. When this election concludes, I'll actually be in the final stages of working with our governor on getting our current equity budget passed through the legislature. That's going to be priority number one for me. We cannot let the cost of this pandemic be balanced on the backs of our teachers or our kids. This is going to provide an opportunity for me to get started right away, working closely with our legislators to articulate a strong vision for education in Wisconsin that values all of our children, especially those that need us the most. Second, we need to make sure our teachers are getting vaccinated so we can get all of our schools open safely. And last but not least, while we continue to navigate this crisis, we must also focus on our recovery plan so that we are creating a future that's better than the past. We have to continue moving forward while we catch everyone up. I have the support of over 200 educators and community leaders because they know I will be ready to lead the department on day one. Thank you.
Well, I too would like to thank the PTA for hosting this event and all the other candidates for showing up and for all the work that they've done. I'll echo what Jill said. This is an important moment in our state. We're at a crossroads and folks need to pay attention. So the PTA is to be congratulated for hosting an event like this. I think elections are about timing. And I think my plan to be ready to lead, ready to learn, ready to teach and produce future ready graduates, it's time for that. I think of all the candidates, I'm the one best positioned to lead the entire state, because until and unless we begin to care about each other and this becomes a statewide issue, we're not going to move the needle forward on any of these issues. We have to be in this together. If you look at your logo on the bottom of the screen, I'm the only candidate who's comes from the part of the state who's above the bottom line in that. And I know people all over this entire state. I can bring this place together. I know we can serve all children in all four corners. Elections are about timing, and I think it's time for Troy Gunderson to be elected State Superintendent of Public Instruction.
On behalf of Wisconsin PTA and the candidates, we would like to thank you for attending tonight's forum. Special thanks to our sponsors for their support and to the candidates for their time and commitment to education. This forum will be available to rewatch. A link will be placed on our website at wisconsinpta.org. Please remember to vote in the primary on February 16th and again in the spring election on April 6th. Thank you and good night.
Good night, everybody. Heather, you've been holding out on us. Where did that young man come from?
He snuck in.
Oh, he's beautiful. Good for you. Good for
Sheila.
you.
Thank you.
Sheila, that color looks stunning on you.
Thank you. I gotta try and keep up with you. It's impossible. It's impossible.
My goodness.